My sister's vicious words sliced through the quiet of my father's funeral like a sharpened blade. "Worthless trash," she hissed, her perfectly manicured hand gripping a crystal champagne flute while mourners pretended not to hear. I stood frozen by my father's casket, my grief suddenly compounded by the familiar sting of Emma's cruelty. My name is Olivia Bennett, and this is the story of how my family's darkest betrayal became my most triumphant redemption. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The cemetery stretched out around us like a pristine green ocean, dotted with islands of granite and marble. Spring flowers nodded in the gentle breeze, creating a surreal contrast to the hollowness that had settled in my chest since receiving the call about my father's heart attack 3 days earlier. Thomas Bennett had been many things: a ruthless business tycoon, a demanding father, and a complicated man. But he had been the only person who ever truly believed in me, even when I couldn't believe in myself. "I can't believe she even showed her face today," my sister Emma whispered loudly to our cousin Melissa, both dressed in designer black dresses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. 5 years of radio silence, and now she crawls back, probably hoping for a handout. I adjusted the sleeve of my department store blazer, suddenly self-conscious of the fraying thread at the cuff that I'd meant to fix but never found time for between my 2 jobs. At 32, I wasn't where society expected someone with my pedigree to be. No corner office, no luxury apartment, no impressive title. Just a small studio in a forgotten corner of the city and dreams I was still fighting to breathe life into. The minister's words faded into the background as I felt the weight of judgmental stares from relatives I barely recognized anymore. 5 years ago, I'd walked away from my family's wealth, from the suffocating expectations, from the poisonous competition that had consumed my sister, and turned her into someone I no longer recognized. My father had understood my choice, even if he never defended it publicly. "She'll be disappointed when she hears the will," Emma continued, her voice carrying just enough for me to hear. "Daddy wouldn't leave a cent to someone who abandoned the family business to chase some pathetic artistic fantasy." My fingers curled into tight fists as I maintained my focus on the mahogany casket being lowered into the dark earth. What Emma and the rest of them didn't know was what those 5 years of silence had truly contained. The struggles, the failures, the small victories, and ultimately, the success I'd fought for entirely on my own terms. The cemetery workers began filling the grave with soil, each thud of dirt against wood marking the finality of my father's departure from this world. As people began drifting toward their luxury vehicles for the reception at my father's estate, I lingered, needing a moment alone with the father who had been my silent supporter even when I chose a path that baffled everyone else in our social circle. "I hope you knew I was doing it," I whispered to the fresh mound of earth. "I hope you understood what I was building all those years I stayed away." The drive to my father's mansion was filled with memories of a childhood split between incredible privilege and emotional poverty. The Bennett estate stood on 5 pristine acres, a monument to old money and newer ambitions. The sprawling Georgian home with its perfect symmetry and imposing columns had once been my playground, then my prison, and finally, the place I'd fled from to save myself. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The grand foyer was filled with black-clad figures balancing canapés and champagne, their somber expressions barely concealing the calculations happening behind their eyes. My father had been worth hundreds of millions. Who would get what was the only real question on anyone's mind today? "Well, look who's finally gracing us with her presence," Emma said loudly as I entered, her voice cutting through several conversations. At 35, my sister had perfected the art of looking both flawless and frightening. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe knot, highlighting razor-sharp cheekbones and eyes that held all the warmth of an Arctic winter. "Did you have trouble finding parking for that rusted heap you call a car?" Several relatives tittered behind their hands, and I felt a flash of the old shame and inadequacy that had been my constant companions growing up as the disappointing daughter, the one who preferred art to acquisitions, creation to competition. My car works just fine, Emma, I replied evenly, accepting a glass of water from a passing server. I'm sorry for your loss. Our loss, she corrected with a saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes. Though I'm not sure what you're mourning, the father you abandoned or the inheritance you won't be getting. I took a slow sip of water, letting her words wash over me without penetrating. 5 years ago, they would have devastated me. Now they merely reminded me of why I'd left. Emma, perhaps this isn't the time. Our Uncle Gerald intervened, though his eyes held the same curiosity as everyone else's. As my father's younger brother and CFO of Bennett Industries, he had always played the role of family peacemaker while quietly ensuring his own interests were protected. Oh, I think it's exactly the time, Emma countered, her voice carrying across the room. Everyone's thinking it, Uncle Gerald. Olivia abandoned Dad and the family business to live in squalor and chase some ridiculous dream of being an artist. And now she's back, probably hoping Dad forgave her enough to leave her a consolation prize in his will. The room grew uncomfortably quiet as relatives pretended to be absorbed in their drinks while hanging on every word of the confrontation. This was prime gossip material for the next 6 months of country club luncheons. I'm here to honor Dad, I said simply. Nothing more. Emma's laugh was brittle. Honor him? By what measure? You were his biggest disappointment. The daughter who rejected everything he built. The Bennett who couldn't cut it in the real world. I felt heat rising to my cheeks but maintained my composure. We all grieve in our own ways, Emma. Is that what you call it? Because from where I stand, you're nothing but worthless trash who couldn't handle the pressure of real responsibility. Her words were slurred slightly, betraying that this wasn't her first or even third glass of champagne. You left me to carry everything while you played at being independent. Do you have any idea what it's been like keeping this company running while Dad got sicker? A few gasps punctuated the room. While everyone knew of the siblings' estrangement, Emma had never been quite this publicly vicious before. Before I could respond, Mr. Harrison, my father's longtime attorney, cleared his throat from the entrance to the living room. If everyone could please take a seat, it's time to read Thomas Bennett's last will and testament, as per his explicit instructions that it be done today. The energy in the room shifted immediately as people scrambled for seats, the drama momentarily forgotten in favor of the main event. Emma straightened her shoulders and took the central position on the main sofa, a subtle power move that didn't go unnoticed. I found a spot near the back wall, arms crossed, preparing myself for whatever would come next. Mr. Harrison, a slight man with wire-rimmed glasses and impeccable posture, had been my father's trusted legal advisor for over 30 years. He placed his briefcase on the antique coffee table and removed a thick document bound in blue leather. Thomas was very specific about the conditions under which this will should be read. Quote, he began, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who had mediated family wealth disputes for decades. All family members must be present, and it must occur on the day of his funeral service. Emma nodded imperiously, as though approving of our father's instructions. Uncle Gerald checked his gold watch, while Aunt Patricia dabbed at non-existent tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. Cousin Melissa scrolled through her phone until her mother nudged her sharply. First, Mr. Harrison continued, the Bennett estate in Greenwich, the apartment in Manhattan, and the vacation properties in Aspen and the Hamptons will be maintained by the Bennett Family Trust. Emma's lips curved into a satisfied smile as she adjusted her pearl necklace, a Bennett family heirloom that should have been shared between us but somehow had become exclusively hers after our mother's death. The art collection, valued at approximately $12 million, will be donated to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, with specific pieces allocated to various cultural institutions, as detailed in Appendix A. A slight frown crossed Emma's face. She had always coveted our father's impressive art collection, particularly the Monet that hung in his study. The classic car collection will be sold, with proceeds going to the Thomas Bennett Foundation for Entrepreneurial Arts, a new charitable organization whose charter is included in Appendix B. The tension in the room began to build as Mr. Harrison methodically worked through assets that were being distributed to places other than family members, bank accounts. Uncle Gerald shifted uncomfortably in his seat, Aunt Patricia's tissue dabbing became more pronounced. Emma's knuckles whitened around her champagne flute. As for Bennett Industries, Mr. Harrison continued, and the room went completely still. This was the crown jewel, a multinational corporation valued at over $2 billion, the source of the family's wealth and power for 2 generations. Emma sat forward slightly, her expression a careful mask of anticipated triumph. As COO for the past 5 years, she had been the presumptive heir to the company's leadership, a position she had coveted since childhood. Bennett Industries will undergo a significant restructuring, effective immediately upon the reading of this will. Emma's smile faltered slightly. Restructuring wasn't part of the plan she and my father had undoubtedly discussed over the years. Uncle Gerald removed his glasses and began cleaning them nervously with his pocket square. 51% controlling interest in Bennett Industries will be transferred to— Mr. Harrison paused, his eyes finding mine across the room— Olivia Bennett. The crystal flute slipped from Emma's fingers, shattering against the marble floor in perfect synchronization with her composure. "That's impossible," she whispered, her face draining of color. Uncle Gerald stood abruptly. "There must be some mistake." Thomas never mentioned anything about this arrangement. Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses calmly. "There is no mistake. The documentation was finalized 3 months ago, with Thomas of sound mind and body, witnessed by myself and 2 other partners from my firm." Emma turned to look at me, her expression transforming from shock to fury. "What did you do?" she hissed. "How did you manipulate him when he was sick?" I remained silent, as stunned as everyone else in the room. My father and I had maintained a quiet, private relationship after I left the family business. Occasional lunches, brief phone calls. But he had never once mentioned any intention of leaving me the company I had walked away from. Additionally, Mr. Harrison continued over the rising murmurs. "Thomas has left a sealed letter for Olivia, to be opened privately after this reading." Emma rose to her feet, trembling visibly. "This is a farce. Dad would never leave the company to someone who abandoned it, who abandoned him. She hasn't even set foot in the offices for 5 years while I've been there every single day, keeping everything running." Mr. Harrison removed another document from his briefcase. Thomas anticipated objections and prepared a video statement to be played at this time. The large television on the wall flickered to life, and suddenly my father's face filled the screen. Though clearly recorded during his illness, his once robust frame notably thinner, his thick silver hair sparse. His eyes held the same sharp intelligence and determination that had built an empire. "If you're watching this," he began, his voice slightly raspy but strong, "then I'm gone, and Harrison is doing exactly as I instructed. I can imagine the scene right now, the shock, the objections, perhaps even some broken crystal." His eyes seemed to twinkle momentarily, as though he could see Emma's reaction from beyond the grave. "Let me be clear. This decision was made with full mental capacity and after years of careful observation. Emma, you have been an excellent operational leader, but your vision for Bennett Industries has always been limited by your fear of change and your need for control. You've maintained what I built, but you haven't grown it. You haven't innovated." Emma sank back onto the sofa, her expression stricken as our father continued from the screen. Olivia, on the other hand, took the hardest path possible. She walked away from security, from wealth, from the family name, to build something of her own. Many of you believed she failed. I've heard the whispers at family gatherings, the thinly veiled mockery. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. What none of you realized is that Olivia hasn't been failing. She's been building. That artistic fantasy, Emma so often ridiculed, has become Horizon Interactive, one of the most innovative digital media companies in the country, a company that grew from nothing to being valued at over $60 million in just 5 years, without a single dollar of family money or connections. The collective gasp in the room was audible. Uncle Gerald's mouth actually fell open. I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Pride in my father's recognition of what I'd built, grief that he was gone, and a strange sense of vindication after years of being dismissed by the people in this room. "The truth is," my father continued, Bennett Industries needs what Olivia has proven she can create: genuine innovation, authentic vision, and the courage to break from outdated traditions. That's why I'm leaving her controlling interest, not as a gift but as an earned responsibility. Emma's face had transformed into a mask of barely contained rage. "This is insanity," she whispered. "She knows nothing about running Bennett Industries." "And for those who might believe Olivia is unprepared," my father added, as though anticipating every objection, "I'll remind you that she holds an MBA from Wharton, worked in every department of Bennett Industries before her departure, and has subsequently built a company from the ground up without the safety net of family wealth, something none of the rest of you have ever done." My father's eyes seemed to look directly at me through the screen. "Olivia, I know this comes as a shock. You left because you needed to create your own path, and you've done that brilliantly. I'm asking you to bring that same vision back to Bennett Industries, not as the daughter who needed to escape, but as the leader who earned her place through merit rather than birthright." Tears burned behind my eyes as I listened to the father I had both loved and struggled to understand for my entire life. "A final note," he said, his expression growing more serious. "Emma, you're brilliant and driven, but your methods have become increasingly troubling. The board has been aware of certain financial discrepancies under your leadership for some time. I've protected you from the consequences, but that protection ends with my death. Mr. Harrison has a separate envelope containing documentation of these issues, which will require immediate attention." Emma's face went from red with anger to white with fear in an instant. Uncle Gerald looked at her sharply, his expression changing from support to suspicion. "I've made many mistakes in my life," my father concluded, "but I've tried to correct them before leaving this world. Olivia, the letter Harrison has for you explains everything else you need to know. I'm proud of you, daughter, more than you ever realized." The screen went black, and the silence that followed was absolute. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and produced a sealed envelope with my name written in my father's distinctive handwriting. "There are additional legal matters to discuss," he said, "but perhaps this would be a good moment for a brief recess." Emma stood abruptly, her composure completely shattered. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous as she stormed past me toward the door. "You may have fooled Dad somehow, but you'll never survive in his world. You're still the same pathetic, weak sister you've always been." As the room emptied, people suddenly eager to process the shocking developments in private, I remained seated, the unopened letter heavy in my hands. Whatever came next would change everything, not just for me, but for the entire Bennett legacy. The sister who had called me worthless trash just hours earlier now faced a reckoning she never saw coming, and I found myself at a crossroads I never expected to face. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal on my father's letter, ready at last to hear the final words from the man who had, against all expectations, believed in me when no one else would. The letter trembled in my hands, its weight far greater than mere paper and ink. My father's familiar handwriting stared back at me, bold, confident strokes that had signed billion-dollar contracts now forming what would be his final words to me. Around me, the grand living room of the Bennett estate had emptied, leaving me alone with truths I wasn't sure I was ready to face. "My dearest Olivia," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then Harrison has done as instructed, and the initial shockwave has already hit." I imagine Emma didn't take it well. She never did handle surprises with grace. A sad smile tugged at my lips as I could almost hear my father's wry tone in the words. What I couldn't say in the video, what I couldn't reveal with others present, is the full truth of what's been happening at Bennett Industries. 3 years ago, I discovered financial irregularities that led me down a troubling path. Emma, alongside your Uncle Gerald, has been systematically diverting company funds through a network of shell corporations. At first, I believed it was merely aggressive tax avoidance, but further investigation revealed outright fraud, millions siphoned into private accounts, falsified board reports, and threatened employees who raised questions. My hands shook harder, and I had to place the letter on my lap momentarily to steady myself. The sister who had called me worthless was actually stealing from our father? The perfect heir was a criminal? I considered going to the authorities immediately, the letter continued, but I couldn't bear the thought of my daughter in prison. Instead, I began working quietly with trusted investigators to document everything, while searching for a solution that would protect the company without destroying Emma entirely. That's when I started following your journey more closely. I swallowed hard, remembering the occasional industry events where I'd catch glimpses of my father watching from across the room, or the congratulatory flowers that would arrive after Horizon Interactive hit significant milestones, always with cards signed simply, "A Proud Observer." What you built with Horizon wasn't just impressive in its own right, it showed me the kind of leader you've become. Principled, innovative, compassionate but firm. Everything Bennett Industries needs now. The company requires transformation, not just new leadership. It needs your vision, Olivia. Your integrity, and yes, your forgiveness for the way this family has treated you. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. The evidence against Emma and Gerald is contained in a secure server. Harrison has the access codes. What you do with this information is now your choice. Prosecution would be justified but devastating to the Bennett name. Mercy might be undeserved but could offer a path to redemption. This burden of choice is unfair, but leadership rarely comes with easy decisions. I looked up from the letter, my gaze falling on the portrait of my father that hung above the fireplace. Younger, stronger, his eyes containing that same fierce determination that had built an empire from nothing. Now that empire, along with its secrets and wounds, had been placed in my hands. Whatever you decide, the letter concluded, know that my greatest regret was not defending you publicly when you needed it most. My proudest accomplishment isn't Bennett Industries, it's seeing the woman you've become despite, not because of, your family name. Lead with wisdom, daughter. Lead with compassion when possible, and firmness when necessary. Most importantly, lead with the courage that has always defined you, even when no one else could see it. All my love, Dad. I carefully folded the letter and slipped it into my jacket pocket just as the heavy doors to the living room swung open. Emma stood in the doorway, her perfect composure reconstructed, though her eyes burned with a cold fury that made the room temperature seem to drop. "Enjoying your moment of triumph?" she asked, her voice dangerously controlled as she moved into the room like a predator stalking prey. "I hope so, because it won't last. The board won't accept you, the executives won't respect you, and I certainly won't help you." I stood, feeling strangely calm despite the storm brewing before me. "Did you think he didn't know, Emma? About the money? About the threats to employees who questioned your reports?" Her step faltered almost imperceptibly, but her expression remained glacial. "I don't know what lies you filled his head with during his illness, but he knew everything." I cut in quietly. The shell companies, the offshore accounts, the falsified board presentations. He had investigators documenting it all for years. The color drained from Emma's face before fury rushed back in. "You're bluffing." "If he had evidence, he would have confronted me." "He was trying to protect you," I said, the irony of the situation not lost on me. "He couldn't bear the thought of his daughter facing criminal charges." Emma's laugh was brittle. "Always the merciful saint, aren't you? Even now, trying to take the moral high ground." "This isn't about morality," I replied. "It's about choices. Your choices led us here, Emma. Not mine." "My choices?" she hissed, stepping closer. "I stayed. I worked 18-hour days for that company while you ran away to play artist. I was the one sitting beside his hospital bed while you were too busy with your precious startup to visit more than once a month." The accusation stung because it contained a kernel of truth. I hadn't been there as much as I should have been during his final months. But Emma didn't know about the late-night video calls, the business advice exchanged, the quiet reconciliation that had happened away from judgmental family eyes. "He was proud of you too, you know," I said softly. "Until you betrayed everything he built." Something flashed in Emma's eyes, pain, perhaps, or regret quickly buried beneath renewed anger. "You have no idea what it took to keep this company growing. The pressure, the expectations. You escaped them all while I carried everything. Nobody asked you to steal, Emma. That was your choice." She stepped even closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You won't last a week as CEO. You don't have what it takes to survive in this world. I'll make sure of it." Before I could respond, Mr. Harrison cleared his throat from the doorway. "Ms. Bennett." "Both Ms. Bennetts, the board has convened an emergency meeting in the library. They're requesting your immediate presence." Emma straightened her shoulders, shooting me one last contemptuous glance before striding toward the door. Perfect timing. They'll never accept this farce. The Bennett Industries Board of Directors, 12 men and women who collectively controlled billions in assets, sat around the massive oak table in my father's library. The tension was palpable as Emma and I entered, with Mr. Harrison following quietly behind us. Edward Chambers, the lead director who had been my father's closest friend for decades, stood as we entered. His expression was grave as he nodded to each of us in turn. "Emma, Olivia, thank you for joining us on this difficult day. We've called this emergency session to address the unexpected transitions outlined in Thomas's will." Emma stepped forward immediately. "Directors, while we all respect my father's wishes, we must acknowledge that this decision was made during his illness and doesn't reflect the company's best interests. Olivia has been completely disconnected from Bennett Industries for 5 years. She lacks the institutional knowledge, the industry relationships, and frankly, the commitment required for this position." Several directors nodded, and I recognized the practiced ease with which Emma commanded a room, a skill I'd once envied and now needed to match. "With all due respect," Emma continued, "I believe the board should exercise its emergency powers to maintain current leadership until a proper succession plan can be implemented." Edward Chambers looked thoughtful. "You raise valid concerns, Emma." He turned to me. "Olivia, would you care to respond?" All eyes turned to me, some curious, some skeptical, all evaluating. 5 years ago, I would have shrunk under such scrutiny. But I wasn't that person anymore. "Directors," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I understand your concerns. Change is always unsettling, particularly unplanned change. But my father's decision wasn't made lightly or without careful consideration of the company's future." I moved toward the table, making eye contact with each board member. "It's true that I've been building my own company rather than working at Bennett Industries. But that experience, creating something from nothing, without the safety net of family wealth or connections, has given me perspective that can't be gained from within these walls." "Perspective doesn't replace experience," interjected Richard Morton, a director known for his conservative approach to business. "Bennett Industries isn't a startup, Ms. Bennett. It's a multinational corporation with thousands of employees and shareholders depending on stable leadership." "You're absolutely right, Mr. Morton," I agreed, earning a surprised look. "Bennett Industries isn't a startup, but perhaps that's precisely the problem. While the company has maintained its position, it hasn't truly innovated in nearly a decade. Our market share in key sectors has declined by 17% over the past 5 years, and our R&D investment has fallen to half the industry average." Several directors exchanged glances. These weren't facts typically discussed so bluntly in board meetings. "Meanwhile," I continued, 3 of our main competitors have launched product lines that are outperforming ours by significant margins. Companies that were once a fraction of our size are now direct threats because they've embraced innovation while we've clung to tradition." Emma scoffed. "This is exactly why the company needs experienced leadership, not theoretical critiques from someone who hasn't been involved." Mr. Harrison stepped forward then, clearing his throat. "If I may, directors, there's additional information that bears on this discussion." He placed a leather portfolio on the table. Thomas Bennett left specific documentation regarding the company's current financial position and leadership concerns. Emma's face paled slightly. "What kind of documentation?" Edward Chambers asked, reaching for the portfolio. "Financial audits conducted privately over the past 2 years," Harrison replied, his voice carefully neutral, "along with evidence of certain irregularities in reporting to this board." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Edward opened the portfolio and began scanning the first document, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "These allegations are serious," he said finally, looking up at Emma. "Are you aware of these discrepancies?" Emma's composure remained intact, but I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. "Those documents lack context," she said smoothly. During the market volatility of the past few years, we had to make certain strategic reallocations to protect our core business interests. Reallocations, Edward repeated carefully. Including the $27 million transferred to shell companies in the Cayman Islands? A stunned silence fell over the room. Emma's carefully constructed defense crumbled visibly as directors began passing the documents among themselves, murmurs of shock and dismay filling the air. I think, Edward said slowly, looking between Emma and me, that the board needs time to review these materials thoroughly before making any decisions about leadership transitions. Emma stepped forward, desperation edging into her voice. This is obviously a manipulation, a way for Olivia to seize control by damaging my reputation. The documentation includes bank records, Emma, Edward interrupted gently, and witness statements from financial officers who were instructed to alter reports. I was protecting the company. Emma's voice rose sharply, making difficult decisions while my father grew weaker and more sentimental. Everything I did was to strengthen Bennett Industries against competitors who don't play by the rules. By breaking the law? I asked quietly. Emma whirled toward me, her composure finally shattering completely. You have no right to judge me. You weren't here. You were off playing entrepreneur while I was saving this company from Dad's increasingly poor decisions. His illness affected his judgment years before anyone would admit it. The board members watched in stunned silence as the perfect, polished Emma Bennett came undone before their eyes. Directors, Mr. Harrison interjected calmly, given these revelations, I suggest adjourning to review the full documentation. Thomas was very clear about his wishes, but he also wanted the board to have all information necessary to make informed decisions. Edward Chambers nodded gravely. I believe that's wise. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning at 9. He turned to Emma, his expression now stern. In the meantime, Emma, I must ask you to surrender your company credentials and access. These allegations require immediate protective measures. Emma stood frozen, the magnitude of what was happening finally seeming to register. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing around her, and for perhaps the first time in her adult life, she had no prepared response, no calculated move to make. This isn't over, she finally whispered, her gaze fixed on me with pure hatred before she turned and walked out, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors like a retreating army. As the directors filed out, their expressions grim and conversations hushed, Edward Chambers approached me. Thomas never mentioned any of this, he said quietly. Not the fraud, not his plans for succession. I don't think he wanted to believe it himself, I replied. She's still his daughter. Edward studied me thoughtfully. And what will you do now, Olivia? The evidence is substantial enough for criminal charges. The question echoed my father's letter, the burden of choice now resting squarely on my shoulders. What did justice look like in this situation? What would true leadership require? I need time to consider the best path forward, I said carefully. For the company, for the employees, and yes, even for Emma. Edward nodded slowly. Your father always said you had wisdom beyond your years. I'm beginning to see that now. He extended his hand. Welcome back to Bennett Industries, Ms. Bennett. I suspect we're in for quite a transformation. As I shook his hand, the weight of responsibility settled more firmly on my shoulders. This wasn't the triumphant moment of revenge that would have satisfied the wounded girl who left 5 years ago. It was something more complex, a challenge that would test every skill I'd developed, every lesson I'd learned during my time away. The grand house emptied as evening fell, staff quietly clearing away the remnants of the funeral reception, while I sat alone in my father's study. The room still held his presence, in the lingering scent of his cologne, in the precisely arranged books on the shelves, in the collection of family photos that tracked a lifetime of milestones. I picked up a silver frame from his desk, a photograph from my college graduation. Emma and I stood on either side of our father, all smiles and celebration, before ambition and jealousy had carved such a deep chasm between us. What had happened to that sister? When had achievement become so twisted with resentment? A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Mr. Harrison stood in the doorway, his expression somber. Your sister has left the property, he said. Security reports, She took only personal items from her suite. I nodded, unsurprised. She'll regroup and plan her next move. Emma never accepts defeat easily. Indeed. Harrison moved into the room, placing a small flash drive on the desk. This contains additional files your father wanted you to have, strategic assessments of Bennett Industries, his personal notes on potential innovation pathways, and dossiers on key executives he trusted, and those he did not. I picked up the drive, turning it over in my fingers. He prepared for everything, didn't he? Thomas knew this day would come eventually, Harrison said gently, though he had hoped for reconciliation between his daughters before it did. I sighed, feeling the weight of regret for what might have been. Did he ever tell you why he didn't confront Emma directly? Why he let it continue while gathering evidence? Harrison removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully before answering. He believed that Emma's actions, while unquestionably wrong, came from a place of twisted loyalty to the company. She convinced herself she was protecting Bennett Industries, even as she betrayed its principles. Thomas hoped that given time, she might find her way back to the values he'd tried to instill in both of you. And now that responsibility falls to me, I said quietly. Yes, Harrison agreed, though I suspect you're more prepared for it than you realize. He moved toward the door, pausing before he left. Your father once told me that his greatest regret was not recognizing sooner that his daughters needed different things from him, that Emma needed boundaries while you needed freedom. He was very proud of what you built with that freedom, Olivia. After Harrison left, I moved to the windows overlooking the sprawling estate grounds, now silver blue in the moonlight. Tomorrow would bring board meetings, press statements, employee concerns, and 1,000 decisions that would shape the future of Bennett Industries. But tonight, in the quiet aftermath of revelation, I had one more decision to make. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Emma's contact, a number I hadn't called in years. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. Emma, it's Olivia, I said after the beep. I know today was devastating for you, but this doesn't have to end with prosecution and public disgrace. There's a path forward that honors Dad's legacy while allowing you the chance to make amends. If you're willing to talk, I'll be at Riverside Cafe tomorrow at 7 a.m. Just you and me, no lawyers. I paused, searching for the right words. We're still sisters, Emma. That has to count for something. I ended the call, uncertain whether she would come, whether reconciliation was even possible after everything that had happened. But leadership meant offering the chance, even when forgiveness seemed impossible. The woman Emma had called worthless trash at our father's funeral now held the keys to her future. The question that remained was whether either of us could build something meaningful from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Not just a company, but a family fractured by ambition and misunderstanding. Tomorrow would begin the real test of the strength I'd built during those 5 years away. Not just as a businesswoman, but as a person who understood that true power came not from control or wealth, but from the courage to choose healing over harm, even when justice might demand otherwise. Riverside Cafe sat on the edge of the harbor, a modest establishment where my father and I had occasionally met for quiet conversations away from family scrutiny. At 6:45 a.m., I claimed a corner table with a view of both the entrance and the water, watching early morning light dance across the waves while fishing boats headed out for the day's catch. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Fishermen casting their nets into uncertain waters, hoping for a worthwhile return, much like the olive branch I'd extended to my sister. I ordered 2 coffees, mine black, Emma's with a precise amount of cream, and 2 sugars, the way she'd taken it since high school. Old habits and memories surfaced easily now that I was back, some painful, others bittersweet. The cafe filled with morning commuters grabbing pastries and caffeine before disappearing into their daily routines, lives untouched by the seismic shifts occurring in mine. At 7:15, I was still alone, my hope of reconciliation fading with each passing minute. Perhaps it had been naive to expect Emma to show up, to believe she could set aside her pride and fury long enough for a conversation. Just as I was reaching for my phone to check messages, the bell above the cafe door chimed. Emma stood in the entrance, scanning the room with wary eyes. She wore large sunglasses despite the early hour, her hair pulled back severely, dressed in a tailored suit that served as armor. Several heads turned to watch her, She had always commanded attention without effort. When her gaze found mine, she hesitated before moving toward my table with measured steps. "You came," I said simply, as she took the seat across from me. "Apparently." She removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes rimmed with exhaustion, though I'm not entirely sure why. I pushed the coffee toward her. "It's still how you like it?" A flicker of surprise crossed her face as she cautiously took a sip. "You remembered. Some things stay with you." I wrapped my hands around my own cup, drawing comfort from its warmth. "Thank you for coming, Emma." She placed the cup down carefully. "Let's not pretend this is a social reunion, Olivia. You said there was a path forward. I'm here to learn what that means, nothing more." The defenses were firmly in place. The Emma I knew had never been one to show vulnerability willingly. But she was here, which was more than I had dared hope for. "The board is reviewing the evidence." I began directly. By their own bylaws, they're obligated to report financial fraud of this magnitude to the SEC and law enforcement. Emma's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. "And you've called me here to gloat before the handcuffs come out? How generous." "I've called you here because I believe there's an alternative," I replied, keeping my voice even. "One that requires significant restitution but avoids criminal charges." Wariness mingled with the first glimmer of hope in her expression. "What kind of alternative?" "Full financial repayment of all diverted funds. Resignation from Bennett Industries. A 5-year non-compete agreement." I outlined the terms carefully. "And most importantly, your expertise applied to something meaningful. Directing the Bennett Foundation's new division focused on ethics and corporate leadership." Emma stared at me, disbelief evident in her features. "You want me to teach ethics? That's absurdly ironic." "Who better to recognize the warning signs of ethical compromise than someone who's experienced it firsthand?" I countered. "Your journey would be the foundation of the program. How small decisions compound until you find yourself crossing lines you never thought you would." She laughed bitterly. "So I become the cautionary tale. The before picture in your moral redemption story." "No," I said firmly. "You become the voice that might actually reach people in similar positions. The executive who understands the pressures, the rationalizations, the gradual slide from aggressive strategy to outright fraud." Emma fell silent, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup as she considered my words. After a long moment, she looked up with narrowed eyes. "And what does this arrangement gain you, besides avoiding the family scandal of your sister in prison?" The question revealed how deeply our relationship had been damaged. She couldn't conceive of my offer as anything but strategic calculation. Perhaps she was right to be suspicious. Trust between us had been shattered long ago. "It gains the company a resolution that allows for healing rather than further destruction," I answered truthfully. "And personally? It gives me the sister I lost somewhere along the way." Emma's expression flickered, a complex mix of emotions crossing her face before she reinforced her careful mask. "You're being naive if you think we can ever go back to what we were." "I don't want to go back," I said quietly. Going back would mean returning to patterns that broke us both in different ways. I'm talking about moving forward, building something new from the understanding of where we went wrong. She studied me carefully, searching for deception or ulterior motives. "You really believe that's possible?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I believe it's worth trying." The honesty seemed to reach her in a way platitudes couldn't have. Emma looked away, her gaze drifting to the harbor where boats continued their steady work, oblivious to the human drama unfolding in the cafe window. "Dad came to see me 3 months ago," she said finally, her voice so low I had to lean forward to hear her. "After a board meeting where I'd presented manipulated quarterly results. He didn't say anything specific, but something in his eyes. I knew he'd discovered something." She swallowed hard. "Instead of confronting me, he told me a story about his early days building the company. About a moment when he'd been tempted to falsify documentation to secure crucial funding." I listened silently, recognizing our father's indirect approach to difficult conversations. He said the measure of a person isn't in never making mistakes, but in how they respond when their mistakes are revealed. Emma's voice had lost its defensive edge, replaced by something raw and uncertain. I thought he was speaking hypothetically, I should have known better. He was giving you a chance, I said gently. A way back. Which I ignored, she replied bitterly. I doubled down instead, convinced I could hide the evidence before anyone else found it. She met my gaze directly. Why are you offering me the same chance he did? After everything I've done, everything I said about you. The question hung between us, legitimate and weighty. Why was I extending this olive branch when justice might demand harsher consequences? Because he saw something worth saving in both of us, I answered finally, even when we couldn't see it in ourselves or each other. Emma's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, her eyes brightening with unshed tears that she quickly blinked away. The board might not accept your alternative proposal. They will if I make it a condition of my leadership, I said with quiet certainty. Dad left me controlling interest for a reason, to make the difficult decisions that serve the company's long-term health, not just its immediate interests. She studied me with new eyes, perhaps seeing for the first time the strength I'd built during my years away. You've changed, Olivia. We both have, I acknowledged. The question is whether we've changed enough to find a new way forward. Emma took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders as she made her decision. I'll need time to consider your offer. It's not what I expected. Take the day, I said, sliding a business card across the table. This has my personal number. The board reconvenes tomorrow at 9. She nodded, gathering her composure as she rose from the table. She hesitated, seeming to struggle with what to say next. For what it's worth, she finally offered, I didn't mean what I said at the funeral, about you being worthless. It wasn't quite an apology, but from Emma it was significant. I know, I replied simply. After she left, I remained at the table, watching the morning light strengthen across the harbor. The conversation had gone better than I'd dared hope, but the hardest work still lay ahead for both of us. My phone buzzed with a calendar alert. My first official meeting at Bennett Industries headquarters in 5 years would start in an hour. With one last look at the peaceful water, I gathered my things and headed toward a future I hadn't planned for but now embraced with clear-eyed determination. Bennett Industries headquarters occupied a gleaming tower in the heart of downtown, its 60 floors of glass and steel, projecting the power and success my father had built over decades. As I approached the entrance, memories washed over me. My first visit as a child, holding my father's hand and marveling at the building that seemed to touch the sky. Teenage summers spent interning in different departments. My last day, walking out with a cardboard box of personal items, determined to forge my own path. Now I returned not as Thomas Bennett's daughter, but as the company's new controlling shareholder, stepping into leadership I had once fled. The security guard at the desk did a double-take as I approached. Ms. Bennett? He asked, surprise evident in his voice. We weren't expecting you until the board meeting tomorrow. I thought I'd reacquaint myself with the place, I replied with a smile. Is Edward Chambers in the building? 5 minutes later, I was riding the executive elevator to the top floor, my reflection in the polished doors, showing a woman who looked calmer than she felt. The doors opened to reveal the executive suite, a space that had been renovated since my departure, now featuring sleek minimalist design that somehow managed to feel both modern and cold. Edward Chambers stood waiting, his tall frame silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows, showcasing a panoramic city view. At 65, he remained an imposing figure, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the sharp intelligence that had made him my father's most trusted advisor and friend. Olivia, he greeted me warmly, extending his hand. I didn't expect to see you before tomorrow's board meeting. I thought it best to get a head start, I replied, shaking his hand firmly. There's a lot to absorb. He nodded approvingly. Your father would appreciate that approach. Would you like to start with a tour of the changes made in recent years? Actually, I said, I'd like to begin with the financial audit team. I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with regarding Emma's actions. Something flickered in Edward's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or reassessment. Of course. They've been working through the night in the crisis room on 58. I can take you there now. As we rode the elevator down, Edward filled me in on immediate concerns. Nervous executives, inquiries from major clients who had somehow caught wind of yesterday's events, and the board members who were divided on how to proceed. Half want to report everything to authorities immediately, he explained. The others are concerned about stock prices if this becomes public. Your father's reputation is still the company's greatest asset. And what do you think, Edward? I asked, curious about the man who had been my father's moral compass for so many years. He considered his answer carefully. I think there are times when justice and business interests align perfectly, and times when they diverge. This is one of those divergent moments. Whatever path you choose will define not just Emma's future, but the culture of Bennett Industries for years to come. The elevator doors opened to a floor humming with tense energy. Through glass walls, I could see a team of accountants and financial analysts huddled around tables covered with documents and laptops. At our entrance, the room fell silent, all eyes turning toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to apprehension. Everyone, Edward announced. This is Olivia Bennett, who, as you've likely heard, now holds controlling interest in the company following Thomas's succession plan. I stepped forward, taking in the tired faces of people who had been excavating my sister's financial malfeasance through the night. Thank you all for your diligence during this difficult time, I said. I know this isn't easy work, especially given the personal nature of what you're uncovering. A woman in her mid-40s, Janet Chen, according to her badge, stepped forward. As Chief Risk Officer, she had clearly been leading the audit team. Ms. Bennett, we've compiled a preliminary report of our findings. She handed me a tablet with a comprehensive dashboard displayed on screen. The situation is substantial. I scanned the figures, my stomach tightening as I absorbed the scope of Emma's actions. 27 million diverted through shell companies was just the beginning. Creative accounting had masked struggling divisions, inflated successes, and hidden mounting debt that put the company in a far more precarious position than anyone outside the executive suite realized. How did this go undetected for so long? I asked, looking up from the devastating numbers. Janet hesitated, glancing at Edward before answering carefully. Your sister was persuasive when questioned, and those who pushed too hard often found themselves reassigned or let go. The picture became clearer. Not just financial fraud, but a culture of fear and silence that had allowed it to flourish. This was a deeper problem than I had anticipated, one that wouldn't be solved by simply replacing Emma at the top. I need to understand not just what happened, but how it happened, I said, addressing the entire room. The systems that failed, the warnings that were ignored, the culture that permitted it. We need to fix the root causes, not just the symptoms. As the team walked me through their findings, a pattern emerged of gradually escalating ethical compromises. Emma hadn't started with outright fraud. She had begun with aggressive accounting practices that slowly crossed into dangerous territory, each step making the next one easier to justify. 4 hours later, my head swimming with details of financial mechanisms I'd need to address, I thanked the team and prepared to leave. Janet Chen approached me as I gathered my notes. Ms. Bennett, there's something else you should know, she said quietly, guiding me toward a private conference room. Once the door closed behind us, she continued, Your sister wasn't working alone. We found evidence that your Uncle Gerald was not just aware of these activities, but actively participating in them. Though I had suspected as much from my father's letter, having it confirmed sent a fresh wave of disappointment through me. Gerald had been like a second father during my childhood, the one who taught me to sail, who explained complex business concepts in ways my young mind could grasp. How involved was he? I asked. Deeply, Janet replied grimly. In fact, some of the more sophisticated schemes appeared to have originated with him rather than Emma. The revelation added another layer of complexity to an already challenging situation. My offer to Emma now needed to account for Gerald's involvement as well. The family connections ran deeper than I had initially understood. Thank you for your honesty, I told Janet. I'll need your continued transparency as we move forward, no matter what it reveals or who it implicates. She nodded, relief evident in her expression. That's Refreshing to hear, Miss Bennett. As I left the building hours later, the weight of what lay ahead settled more firmly on my shoulders. This wasn't simply about deciding Emma's fate. It was about transforming a company culture that had lost its ethical foundation. The task seemed nearly impossible, yet also vitally necessary. My phone rang as I reached my car, an unknown number that I answered cautiously. Olivia Bennett. It's Emma. Her voice sounded different, subdued perhaps, or simply exhausted. I've been thinking about your offer. And? I prompted when she fell silent. I want to meet again. There are things you don't know yet, things that might change your perspective. I hesitated, wondering if this was another manipulation. When and where? Dad's lake house, she said. Tonight at 7. Come alone. The call ended before I could respond, leaving me with a decision to make. The lake house held powerful memories for our family. Summer weekends spent swimming and sailing, winter evenings around the massive stone fireplace. It was also remote, isolated from neighbors or witnesses. After a moment's consideration, I texted Mr. Harrison with my destination and expected return time, a precaution that felt necessary given the stakes involved. Whatever Emma wanted to reveal, I needed to hear it before tomorrow's board meeting. The drive to the lake house took nearly 2 hours, winding through increasingly rural landscapes as city gave way to forest. Autumn had begun painting the trees in fiery hues, the beauty of the transformation at odds with the turbulence of my thoughts. What could Emma possibly tell me that would change my understanding of the situation? What was her true purpose in arranging this isolated meeting? The gravel driveway crunched under my tires as I approached the familiar A-frame structure nestled among towering pines. Emma's car was already parked outside, and a single lamp glowed in the great room window. I paused before exiting my vehicle, taking a moment to center myself for whatever lay ahead. The wooden steps creaked as I climbed to the porch, my knock echoing in the stillness. When no one answered, I tried the door and found it unlocked, a silent invitation to enter. "Emma?" I called, stepping into the warm interior scented with pine and memories. She stood by the stone fireplace where a small fire crackled, her back to me as she stared into the flames. On the massive oak table that dominated the room lay several leather-bound journals and folders I didn't recognize. "You came," she said without turning. "I wasn't sure you would. You said there were things I needed to know," I replied, moving further into the room but maintaining a cautious distance. "I'm listening." Emma finally turned, and I was struck by the transformation in her appearance since morning. Gone was the perfect corporate armor, replaced by jeans and a simple sweater. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, and she had removed all traces of makeup, revealing the exhaustion etched into her features. "Before I show you what I brought," she said quietly, "I need to know something. This second chance you're offering, is it real? Or is it just a way to control me while you take everything for yourself?" The question cut to the heart of our broken relationship. Years of competition and mistrust had left us unable to recognize sincerity in each other. How could I convince her my offer was genuine when she had spent a lifetime viewing every interaction as a power play? "It's real," I said simply, "but it requires real change from you, not just compliance with terms." She studied me intently, searching for deception. Whatever she saw in my expression must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly and moved toward the table. "These were Dad's private journals," she said, gesturing to the leather-bound books. "I found them in his study safe yesterday after everyone left. The combination was our birth years." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Sentimental to the end." I approached cautiously, eyeing the journals that represented our father's most private thoughts. "Should we be reading these?" "He left them for us to find," Emma replied. "Look at the last entry." She opened the most recent journal to a page marked with a photograph. An old picture of Emma and me as children, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning widely on the very dock visible through the lake house windows. In our father's distinctive handwriting, the final entry read, "If you're reading this, my daughters, then you've found each other again in the aftermath of my departure. These journals contain my failures as much as my successes. Read them to understand, not to judge. The company was never the legacy that mattered most to me." "You were." My throat tightened with emotion as I gently turned pages filled with our father's reflections spanning decades. Entries about business triumphs stood alongside painfully honest admissions of parental mistakes, pushing Emma too hard, not defending my choices, allowing competition between us to flourish rather than nurturing our individual strengths. He knew, Emma said softly, about the fraud, about everything. For years, not just months. I looked up sharply. Why didn't he stop it? Because he blamed himself for creating the conditions that led to it. She handed me a folder containing documents I didn't recognize. This is what I really wanted you to see. Inside were psychological evaluations dated years earlier, detailed assessments of both Emma and me commissioned by our father from a leading organizational psychologist. My report described a creative, independent thinker who needed space to flourish. Emma's outlined a brilliant strategic mind paired with dangerous perfectionism and an unhealthy need for validation. He was trying to understand where he went wrong with us, Emma explained, her voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. These evaluations led him to restructure the company leadership 5 years ago, moving me into the COO role where the pressure became unbearable. I looked up from the documents, seeing my sister with new clarity. You felt you had to succeed at any cost. I felt I could never measure up to his expectations, she corrected quietly. No achievement was ever enough. So I started manufacturing successes, first by exaggerating results, then by manipulating them entirely. The realization dawned slowly. Our father had unknowingly created the perfect conditions for ethical failure by placing Emma in a position where her psychological vulnerabilities became liabilities. This doesn't excuse what I did, she continued, meeting my gaze directly. But it might explain it. Dad realized too late the damage his leadership style had caused. These journals are full of his regrets, about the company culture he built, about how he raised us. I sat heavily in a nearby chair, trying to absorb this new dimension to our family tragedy. Our father had recognized his mistakes but hadn't lived long enough to fully correct them. Now that task fell to us, fixing not just a company, but the broken relationship that mirrored its ethical failures. I'll accept your offer, Emma said finally, breaking the silence. All the terms, including the foundation work. But I want to add something. What's that? I asked. These journals should be part of the ethics program. Anonymized, of course. The lessons about how leadership failures cascade downward. How pressure creates ethical blind spots. That's the real story that executives need to hear. For the first time in years, I saw genuine purpose in my sister's eyes. Not ambition or competition, but a vision for meaningful change born from painful experience. I think Dad would approve of that, I said quietly. Emma nodded, a fragile understanding forming between us. So what happens now? Now we face the board together, I replied. Present a united plan for restitution, restructuring and rebuilding the company culture from the ground up. They might not accept it, she warned. Some will want blood, figuratively speaking. Then we'll need to be very convincing, I said, a trace of our father's determination entering my voice. Because this isn't just about saving your reputation or my leadership. It's about honoring the legacy he really wanted to leave, one of integrity, accountability, and second chances when they're truly earned. As darkness settled over the lake, we spent hours reviewing documents and formulating a plan that acknowledged past wrongs while creating a pathway toward redemption, not just for Emma, but for the entire corporate culture our father had built and later regretted. By the time we left the lake house, something had shifted between us. Not friendship yet, perhaps not even trust, but recognition of a shared purpose that transcended our years of rivalry. The sister who had called me worthless trash at our father's funeral now stood beside me as an ally in the difficult work ahead. The next morning we entered the boardroom together, presenting a united front that visibly startled the assembled directors. For 3 hours we outlined a comprehensive plan for financial restitution, corporate restructuring, ethical overhaul, and leadership transition that would allow Bennett Industries to acknowledge its failures without being destroyed by them. When we finished, Edward Chambers broke the silence that had fallen over the room. Thomas would be proud, he said simply. Not of what happened before, but of how you're choosing to move forward. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, requires more than words to rebuild. But as I looked at my sister, really saw her perhaps for the first time in years, I recognized that the most valuable inheritance our father left wasn't the company or its assets, but this chance to transform broken patterns into something worthy of his name and our own. The woman who had been called worthless trash at her father's funeral now stood ready to lead not from a place of revenge or triumph, but from the harder, braver position of understanding and accountability. Sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty isn't retribution, but reformation of systems, of relationships, and ultimately, of ourselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.